I only have one daughter." My mom sneered into the microphone. Her diamond ring caught the chandelier light as she aimed her manicured finger straight at the dark corner where I sat. "The other one is living proof that if you don't have the brains for high society, you just put on a uniform to scrape by." A tragic failure of our family. 50 VIP guests, judges, CEOs, and my sister's future in-laws erupted in laughter. 50 pairs of eyes swiveled toward me, loaded with pity and naked disgust. I sat perfectly still, spine pressed flat against the chair, swallowing 14 years of humiliation in one scalding gulp. Then the heavy ballroom doors slammed open. The laughter choked off instantly, like someone had cut the power. A 4-star Navy admiral, the absolute peak of military authority, and the father of my sister's fiancé, filled the doorway in immaculate dress whites. His chest was armored with ribbons. My mom lunged forward, her face twisting into a desperate fawning grin. "Oh, Admiral." He walked right past her like she was furniture. His eyes locked onto me across the silent room. He crossed the marble floor in 6 long strides, dropped to one knee beside my chair, and wrapped his massive arms around me. His shoulders shook. His voice cracked open like a man who had been carrying grief for months. I thought you didn't make it." Dear Lord, if you want to know why a 4-star admiral fell to his knees for the daughter my family threw away, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. You won't believe the brutal truth he exposed that completely destroyed my mother's fake empire. The admiral's arms crushed the air out of my lungs, and for one terrible second, I was somewhere else entirely. Not a ballroom, a hospital. The grip was the same desperate bruising the grip of someone terrified of letting go, but the hands were thinner, weaker, dying. My father's hands. The EKG machine shrieked its frantic rhythm in the ICU at Johns Hopkins. My dad's skin had turned the color of wet cement. Pancreatic cancer had hollowed him out in 6 months, but the man still had the grip of a dock worker. He pulled me down until my ear pressed against his cracked lips. His breath rattled like gravel in a tin can. He didn't tell me to be happy. He didn't say he loved me. He begged. "Your mother will eat her alive, Sienna. The second I'm gone, Jennifer has no shield. You have to take the hits. Swear it. Swear you'll protect your sister until she finds someone safe." I swore. I was 20 years old, and I locked myself into a contract with a dying man that would cost me the next 14 years of my life. His monitors flatlined 19 minutes later. The nurses had to pry his fingers off my wrist. The bruises on my knuckles lasted 2 weeks. The weight of that promise never faded at all. How long could anyone keep a vow that heavy without being crushed under it? The funeral was on a Thursday. By that same afternoon, my mother was already cashing in. I walked into the kitchen and found her at the granite island sorting through my father's life insurance policies like they were grocery coupons. A half-empty bottle of Pinot Grigio sat by her elbow. She was complaining loudly into her phone about the cost of the casket while holding a check that represented my father's entire working life. Every double shift, every skipped vacation, every dollar he never spent on himself. When she noticed me standing in the doorway, still wearing my black dress from the cemetery, she slid the check into her designer purse, snapped it shut, and looked me up and down. "Don't even think about asking for a dime. You're a financial drain, Sienna. And frankly, we need to start cutting you out of the family photos. Your face brings down the aesthetic." My father's grave dirt was still fresh on my shoes. She was already erasing me. I said nothing. I stood there until my jaw ached from clenching, then walked back out. Somewhere upstairs, I heard Jennifer crying softly behind her locked bedroom door. I pressed my palm flat against the wood, letting her know I was there. That was enough. It had to be. What kind of mother profits off her husband's death before the headstone is even ordered? 2 weeks later, I placed my college acceptance letter on the dining table. Full academic scholarship. 4 years paid. Engineering program at Virginia Tech. My ticket out. My mother picked it up without reading a single line, tore it cleanly in half, and dropped both pieces into the garbage disposal. She hit the switch. The motor ground the paper into pulp. She leaned across the granite counter, her breath sour with gin, her eyes flat and cold, and whispered directly into my face. "I am not wasting a single penny of my social fund on a brute like you. You want to leave like the trash you are." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Blood pooled against my teeth. In the hallway behind her, Jennifer stood frozen with her school backpack on, tears running silently down her face, her hands balled into tiny fists at her sides. I absorbed the blow so my sister stayed invisible. So our mother's radar wouldn't swing toward her. That was the deal. That was the chain around my neck. Would I let this house break me, or would I find my own way out? The morning I turned 22, I packed a single green canvas sea bag. Everything I owned fit inside it, with room to spare, 3 changes of clothes, a Bible my father had given me, and a photograph of Jennifer on her first day of high school. I stepped into the living room where my mother was drinking her morning coffee and watching the news. I told her I had joined the United States Navy. She laughed so hard she spilled coffee across her silk robe. "Bottom-feeding trash," she said between gasps. "You'll die a nameless grunt in some ditch, and I won't even bother collecting the flag." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask for a hug or a goodbye or a single word of encouragement. I just slung the heavy bag over my shoulder, looked at my sister standing at the top of the stairs, her eyes red, her lip trembling, her hand gripping the banister, and gave her one firm nod. Our silent pact. "Hold the line. I will come back for you." Then I walked out the front door and did not turn around. Could the military forge me into a weapon strong enough to survive this family? The heat in eastern Syria hit 130 degrees by 12 p.m. I was kneeling in the packed dirt outside a bombed-out compound, sweating inside an 80-pound bomb suit, staring at a pressure plate wired to enough C4 to collapse the building behind me. I was an explosive ordnance disposal technician and EOD tech, and I had spent my 20s crawling inches away from detonators that could turn me into a name on a wall. My hands were steady, always steady. I had learned to slow my heart rate to 60 beats per minute to find absolute silence inside the chaos of a war zone, to treat every breath like it might be the last one that mattered. The brotherhood out here was the only honest thing I had ever known. We bled for each other without hesitation, without scorecards, without strings attached. No one here kept a ledger of what you owed them for being alive. Was it actually safer diffusing explosives than sitting at my own family's dinner table Thanksgiving? I sat on a canvas cot inside a dusty command tent, pressing a satellite phone against my ear. The connection crackled and popped with static. 6,000 miles away, my mother answered from the middle of her annual dinner party, clinking crystal women, laughing too loudly, smooth jazz bleeding through expensive speakers. She was buzzing hard on wine that cost more per bottle than my monthly phone allowance. The first thing out of her mouth was a question about whether I was still mopping decks for pennies. She didn't wait for an answer. She launched into a gleaming report about Jennifer's new associate position at a DC law firm, the designer dress she had bought for the firm's holiday gala, the senior partner who had personally complimented Jennifer's brief in court. She talked for 4 straight minutes without once asking me where I was deployed, whether I was eating, whether I was safe. Outside my tent, a mortar round thumped into the ground 200 yards away. The blast shook dust from the canvas ceiling and rattled the folding table legs. I flinched hard. She kept talking about centerpieces. Why did her drunken words still manage to cut deeper than enemy shrapnel? I woke up strapped to a hospital bed in Landstuhl, Germany. The pain in my left side burned white-hot, a searing, blinding band of fire that wrapped around my ribs every time I drew breath. A chunk of shrapnel from a secondary explosion had punched through my body armor and buried itself between my 4th and 5th rib millimeters from my lung. A 2-star general stood at the foot of my bed and pinned a Purple Heart medal to my hospital gown while a nurse adjusted my IV line. He shook my hand and called me a credit to the service. When they finally let me use a phone, I called my mother. I told her I had been wounded in combat. I told her I was in a military hospital in Germany. There was a long, hollow pause on the line. Then she sighed loudly, the same sigh she used when the dry cleaner lost a blouse, and told me that my medical bills had better not show up on her credit report. I hung up without saying another word. I stared at the ceiling tiles and counted them 47 until the morphine pulled me back under. When would I finally stop bleeding for a family that wished I didn't exist? She believed I was broke. She had no idea. The hazard pay stacked fast during deployments. The combat zone tax exemptions were aggressive. I managed my investment accounts from a battered laptop propped on sandbags between missions, buying index funds, acquiring rental properties through a trust, building a portfolio that grew quietly in the background, while she maxed out credit cards on counterfeit luxury. By the time I hit 30, my net worth entirely dwarfed her debt-riddled fake glamour lifestyle. She was leveraged to her teeth. I was solvent, diversified, and invisible. But I never said a word. I maintained the camouflage of the broke-failed soldier, the grunt-mopping decks for pennies. Knowledge is ammunition, and you never hand the enemy your bullets. What would my mother do if she ever discovered her worthless failure could buy and sell everything she owned without blinking? My phone buzzed against the barracks desk just after 6 a.m. Jennifer's name lit the screen. I picked up and heard her gasping through tears, but these were not the tears I'd been dreading for 14 years. These were joy. Pure, cracking, uncontrollable joy. She was engaged. Her boyfriend, a steady, kind-eyed man named Thomas Carter, who had seen through our mother's manipulation the very first time he walked into our childhood home, had proposed at sunset on the Chesapeake Bay. I closed my eyes and pressed my free hand flat against the desk. A massive, suffocating weight I had been carrying since that ICU room slowly, painfully lifted off my ribcage. My father's contract was inches from completion. Jennifer had found her permanent shield, her safe harbor. Could I finally lay down my weapons and stop being the family's sacrificial lamb? The relief lasted exactly 48 hours. My mother discovered who Thomas Carter's father was. 4-star Admiral Samuel Carter, commander of the Atlantic Fleet, a legend in Washington, the kind of name that opens doors that money alone cannot touch. I could practically hear my mother's pupils dilate through the phone when Jennifer mentioned it. Her narcissistic greed shifted into a gear I had never seen before, frantic, predatory, laser-focused. Within 72 hours, she had hijacked every detail of the engagement celebration, booking a massive party at the Jefferson Club, the most exclusive private venue in Arlington, Virginia. She personally curated the guest list: 50 VIPs, federal judges, Fortune 500 executives, political donors, old money families whose approval she had been chasing for decades. This party was never about celebrating Jennifer's love. It was a calculated, predatory social acquisition designed to cement my mother's position in circles she had been clawing toward her entire life. How far would her sociopathic ambition push her before she destroyed everything she touched? I met Jennifer at a quiet diner 2 miles from the naval base 2 days before the party. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Deep circles bruised the skin under her eyes. Her hands trembled around a chipped coffee mug, and she kept glancing toward the door like she expected our mother to walk through it at any second. Our mother's demands had been relentless seating charts revised 9 times a dress code that required Jennifer to get personal approval on her own outfit, screaming midnight phone calls about napkin colors and floral arrangements. She had threatened to cancel the entire engagement if Jennifer didn't comply with every demand. The party was supposed to celebrate my sister's happiness. Instead, it had become our mother's personal coronation ceremony. Jennifer slid her hand across the cracked formica table and gripped mine. Her knuckles went white. Her voice dropped so low the waitress couldn't hear it from 3 feet away. "I know what you gave up for me, Sienna. All of it. Every single year. Every hit you took so she wouldn't turn on me. I know about the college letter. I was standing right there in the hallway when she put it in the garbage disposal. I never forgot that sound. It was the first time anyone in my bloodline had ever acknowledged my pain out loud." My throat closed so tight I couldn't swallow. I squeezed her hand back hard enough to feel the bones and gave her a direct order. "Survive this one party. One more night in the trenches. Hold the line. After this, it's over." I drove back to base and opened my wall locker. The twin silver bars of my O3 rank gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light resting beside the pending paperwork for my O4 promotion to lieutenant commander. Below that, a thick manila folder held the documentation of my combat record, the after-action reports, the commendations, the medical records from Landstuhl. The operation was in its final phase, one last civilian mission behind enemy lines. Once the Admiral's family officially absorbed Jennifer, once Thomas put that ring on her finger and took her away from the blast radius of our mother's narcissism, my 14-year watch was over. I closed the locker door, pressed my forehead against the cold metal, and breathed. Would this engagement party truly be my last covert operation in hostile territory? My phone vibrated aggressively at 9 p.m. Her number. I picked up. My mother's voice came through the speaker like a blade being dragged across glass. She ordered me to attend the engagement party, but the terms were absolute and non-negotiable. I was to sit in the back of the room as far from the stage and the head table as physically possible. I was not to wear my uniform. I was not to mention my rank, my deployments, my service record, or anything connected to the military. I was a background prop, a warm body filling an empty seat where no VIP, would ever look. Don't embarrass me in front of the Admiral, she hissed, her voice dropping to a register that was pure threat, pure control. If you ruin this for me, Sienna, I will make Jennifer's life a living hell. You know I can. You know I will. She was handing me the detonator to her own destruction, and she did not even realize it. My jaw clenched so hard my back teeth ached. The instinct to scream back surged up through my spine like a current. Instead, I closed my eyes and breathed. In for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Hold for 4. Tactical combat breathing, the same technique I used kneeling over live ordnance in the Syrian heat. I agreed to her degrading terms in a flat, dead voice. She smirked audibly through the phone, fully believing she had won, that I was submitting out of weakness and fear that the broken daughter was falling in line one final time. She hung up without saying goodbye. What happens when a careless predator severely underestimates a trained hunter? I packed a garment bag. A simple, understated black dress, the kind you'd buy at a department store for a funeral. No jewelry, no makeup beyond the minimum. I wanted to be completely invisible to her high society vultures, a shadow in the back of their gilded room, a nobody they wouldn't look at twice. But at the very bottom of my duffel bag, beneath the civilian clothes, I packed my challenge coins, one from every unit I'd served, with heavy brass circles that clinked like armor when they shifted. I also tucked in my active duty military ID card, the one with lieutenant printed in block letters, next to a photograph of a woman my mother would never recognize. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, arms raised, and watched the thick scar on my left side pull tight against the skin of my ribs, an angry, puckered line that ran 6 inches along my rib cage. 14 months ago, that shrapnel nearly killed me in the Syrian sand. Now it was a permanent receipt for a debt someone else owed. Tonight I was walking into a different kind of kill zone, one with chandeliers instead of mortar fire and champagne instead of dust. I held my own gaze in the glass, seeing the soldier staring back at me. Which version of me would actually walk out of that room alive? I pulled my rented sedan up to the Jefferson Club at 7:30 p.m. Valets in black vests were aggressively parking Porsches and Mercedes-Benzes along the curved driveway, snapping tickets, jogging back for the next arrival in a choreographed routine designed to impress. The night air was thick with heavy cigar smoke and perfume that clung to the back of my throat like a chemical agent. I stepped out in my plain black dress and flat shoes, noticeably the cheapest vehicle and the most underdressed person within 100 yards. The crushing weight of my mother's world pressed down on me the instant my feet hit the pavement. I walked through the gilded front doors, and my eyes swept the room before my second step landed on the marble. 3 fire exits, one behind the stage, 2 flanking the kitchen corridor. 2 security guards, one at the entrance scanning invitations, one stationed by the bar. 50 guests already seated. Sightlines clear from the back tables to the stage. Threat assessment, 1 hostile target center stage holding a champagne flute performing the role of her life. Who would be the first casualty in this room full of wolves? I took the worst seat in the house. A small 2-top table crammed against the wall next to the swinging kitchen doors, partially hidden behind a massive flower arrangement that reeked of lilies and mothballs. Every time a server pushed through the double doors, I caught a blast of steam, the clatter of stacked plates, and the sharp bark of the head chef cursing about the risotto. The position was tactically sound. I could see every table in the room, every entrance, every exit, and no one could approach me from behind. I sat in complete silence, gripping a glass of ice water so hard the condensation dripped in a slow, steady rhythm onto the white tablecloth. I watched. I cataloged. My mother floated between groups of judges and corporate executives, her champagne flute perpetually refreshed by a server she had trained to hover within arm's reach. Her laugh was pitched at exactly the right frequency to carry across the room, warm, generous, rehearsed. She was performing the role of the loving, devoted matriarch, the generous hostess, the proud mother of a brilliant young lawyer who was marrying into naval royalty. She touched people's arms when she spoke. She tilted her head at a sympathetic angle when she listened. She was flawless, a machine. I had watched this performance my entire life, and it still made my skin crawl. I caught Jennifer's eyes from the head table. She looked at me with a silent, desperate apology carved into every line of her face. Thomas had his hand on her knee, steadying her. I gave Jennifer a tiny nod, imperceptible to anyone more than 5 feet away. Hold the line. 1 more hour. How long could my mother sustain this act before the mask cracked? The string quartet stopped. The room noise settled into a low murmur. My mother stepped onto the small raised stage at the front of the ballroom and tapped the microphone 3 times with her manicured nails, tap, 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 each one landing in the sudden quiet like a gavel strike. She launched into a prepared speech about family values and legacy and sacrifice. She praised Jennifer with manufactured emotion dripping from every syllable, milking the crowd for admiration and envy. She spoke about the proud Herring name, about raising her daughters with unconditional love and devotion, about the importance of giving back to the community. Every word was a lie. Every sentence was a forgery. And the 50 VIPs ate it up, nodding along, dabbing their eyes, believing every word because they had no reason not to. Then her eyes found me in the shadows. I watched the shift happen in real time, the way her pupils contracted, the way the muscles around her mouth tightened, the way the corner of her lip curled upward like a fishhook being set. She had spotted prey, and she couldn't resist the kill. She pointed her diamond-ringed finger directly at me. "I only have one daughter," she announced to the room, her voice bright and cutting and laced with something that sounded almost like pleasure. "The other one is living proof that if you don't have the brains for high society, you just put on a uniform to scrape by. A tragic failure of our family." A wave of uncomfortable chuckles and hushed whispers swept through the room. 50 high society guests shifted awkwardly in their seats, exchanging sideways glances with smug, pitying smirks. The sound bounced off the crystal chandeliers and crashed over me in thick, hot waves, suffocating, humiliating, inescapable. 50 pairs of eyes locked onto the stupid soldier hiding by the kitchen doors. I saw pity. I saw contempt. I saw the smug relief of people grateful they were not me. Jennifer sat at the head table with both hands clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror, her entire body rigid with shock. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I didn't flinch. I sat perfectly still, both hands resting flat on the white tablecloth, my back straight, my breathing controlled at 4-count intervals. And in that exact second, the invisible chain around my neck, the one my dying father had welded there 14 years ago in that ICU room, shattered completely. The debt was paid. Every hit I had taken, every insult I had swallowed, every year I had sacrificed, this public execution was the final receipt. The ledger was closed. I was no longer an abused daughter performing obedience for a dead man's promise. I was a lieutenant in the United States Navy, and I had just authorized a full retaliatory strike. How would I execute my revenge against this entire room? Have you ever stayed silent while toxic family members used you as a punchline just to protect someone else? Hit the like button and let me know in the comments. Because right after they laughed at me, the most powerful man in the room walked in, and the laughter turned into absolute terror. The heavy oak doors at the front of the ballroom swung open so hard they cracked against the marble walls like twin gunshots. The laughter died instantly, choked off mid-breath in 50 throats at once, as though the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Admiral Samuel Carter stood in the doorway in full dress whites, his uniform pressed to a razor's edge, his chest armored with row after row of service ribbons and warfare devices that represented 40 years of command in the most powerful naval force on Earth. The 4 silver stars on his shoulder boards caught the light and threw hard, sharp reflections across the ceiling. The sheer physical gravity of the man froze every VIP in the room mid-motion. Champagne flutes stopped halfway to lips. Forks hovered over plates. Conversations collapsed in the middle of sentences. A woman near the stage actually took a step backward, pressing herself against the wall. The silence was so total I could hear the kitchen staff breathing behind the swinging doors next to me. My mother scrambled off the stage. Her heels clicked frantically on the marble floor. Rapid, desperate, rhythmic, the sound of a woman who had been caught off script as she lunged toward the admiral. Her hand already extended, her face rearranging itself into the most fawning, worshipful expression in her entire arsenal. She smoothed her dress with one hand while reaching out with the other. "Admiral Carter, what an absolute honor. We are so thrilled to have you here tonight. Please let me show you to your seat at the head table. I've arranged everything specially for..." He didn't break stride. He didn't look at her. He didn't acknowledge her outstretched hand or her rehearsed greeting or her existence in any measurable way. His eyes swept past her like she was a piece of furniture someone had left in the aisle. His gaze cut through the crowd, left, right, and then locked onto me in the dark corner by the kitchen. The recognition in his eyes was instant, total. His jaw tightened. His stride changed from ceremonial to urgent, from a walk to something that was almost a march. He cut through the center of the room in a straight line, his polished shoes striking the marble with the authority of a man who commanded aircraft carrier battle groups and entire fleets. Guests physically leaned away from his path, pressing back into their chairs, pulling their arms off the tables. My mother's extended hand hung in the empty air behind him, trembling, abandoned. Her mouth was still half open around the word she never finished. He reached my table in 8 strides. He stopped. He looked down at me, and I watched something shatter behind his eyes, the composure, the command presence, the iron control of a man who had spent decades mastering every emotion on his face. His chin dropped, his nostrils flared, his massive shoulders began to shake. And then the commander of the Atlantic Fleet, a man with the authority to order a cruise missile strike with a single phone call. A man who had stood in the Situation Room, with presidents dropped heavily to one knee on the cold marble floor beside my chair. He grabbed my shoulders with both massive hands and pulled me into a crushing, desperate embrace. His arms locked around me like he was afraid I would disappear. This giant of a man was physically trembling. His voice broke apart when he spoke raw and ragged, loud enough for every paralyzed person in the room to hear clearly. "I thought you didn't make it. Dear God, Sienna, I thought you didn't make it." I stood up immediately. Even in a black cocktail dress and flat shoes, my body snapped into 14 years of muscle memory. Heels together, spine rigid, chin level. My hands locked flat against the seams of my dress in the flawless position of attention. "Honored to see you again, Admiral. Lieutenant Herring standing by." My mother stumbled forward through the crowd, her face completely drained of color, her jaw hanging open in a way that made her look like a stranger to herself. "Admiral, you know her. She's just a useless grunt." The words left her mouth and died in the frozen air between them. The Admiral slowly rose to his full height, towering over the room, his shoulders blotting out the chandelier behind him. He turned to look at my mother. The warmth and relief that had flooded his eyes a moment ago vanished, completely replaced by the cold, calculating stare of a man who had sent hostile vessels to the bottom of the ocean without losing a minute of sleep. A grunt. His voice dropped to a register that made the nearest VIPs physically recoil in their chairs. The Admiral's shadow swallowed my mother completely. He took one slow, deliberate step toward her, and she instinctively retreated one step back, her heel catching on the carpet, her champagne flute tilting dangerously in her white-knuckled grip. "I assume," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of that dead-silent ballroom, "that you have absolutely no idea what your daughter actually does for this country." My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out except a strangled wet sound like a drain trying to clear. Nervous sweat was cutting tracks through her foundation, dissolving the mask she had spent 2 hours painting on in front of her vanity mirror. The Admiral didn't wait for her answer. He turned his back on her, a gesture of pure, deliberate disrespect that every person with a military background in the room understood, and addressed the 50 VIPs who had been laughing at me 90 seconds ago. The same people who had looked at me with pity and contempt now couldn't pull their eyes away from the man standing in front of them. 14 months ago, a forward operating base in eastern Syria. His voice shifted into command briefing mode, hard, precise, clipped, each word carrying the weight of an official military record being entered into evidence. My armored convoy was ambushed outside the wire during a classified strategic inspection tour. An improvised explosive device had been clamped directly to the underside of my vehicle by hostile forces overnight. 3 members of my personal security detail were killed on impact when the lead vehicle triggered a secondary device. I was trapped inside my vehicle with a live charge 6 inches beneath my seat. The disposal team was 45 minutes out. The enemy was closing in on foot. No one in the chain of command expected anyone in that convoy to survive. The room didn't breathe. A woman in the front row, the wife of a federal judge, pressed her manicured fingers against her parted lips. The judge beside her gripped the edge of the table with both hands, his knuckles white. The Admiral raised his arm and pointed a heavy, calloused finger directly at me. "While you people sit in your air-conditioned offices arguing about wine pairings and golf handicaps, this woman, the one you just laughed at, the one you called a failure, took command of that slaughterhouse, under sustained enemy fire with no backup, no cover, and no extraction plan." Lieutenant Herring crawled under my burning vehicle on her stomach and defused that explosive device with her bare hands, while rounds impacted the chassis above her head. When the secondary blast hit 30 seconds later, she threw her own body on top of mine and absorbed the shrapnel that was meant for me. Someone in the second row gasped sharply, a sharp involuntary sound that cut through the paralyzed room like a blade. A crystal wine glass slipped from the federal judge's trembling fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. Burgundy wine bled across the white marble in a dark, spreading stain. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody could move at all. She took shrapnel to the ribs to keep me alive. His voice fractured the words, catching on something raw and deep in his chest. He paused, pressed his jaw shut hard enough to make the muscles in his neck cord like cables, and forcibly regained control. She bled out in the sand so that I could go home to my son, to the man your daughter is about to marry. He took another deliberate step toward my mother. She was retreating now, physically backing up until her hip struck the edge of a banquet table with a crash that rattled every piece of silverware and sent a water glass toppling sideways. She is a highly decorated explosive ordnance disposal specialist, a recipient of the Bronze Star with Valor and the Purple Heart. She has saved more lives in a single afternoon than everyone in this room has managed in a lifetime. And her bravery is not some cheap punchline for your pathetic social climbing. My mother's eyes darted around the room, frantic, desperate, searching for a single sympathetic face, a single ally who might throw her a lifeline or offer even the smallest nod of support. There were none. The crowd had turned completely. The same people who had laughed at me were now staring at her with open, undisguised revulsion, the look reserved for someone who has been publicly unmasked and can never put the mask back on. A silver-haired CEO at the nearest table pushed his chair back and stood up slowly, deliberately. He squared his shoulders, and I recognized his posture instantly, the rigid, unmistakable bearing of a man who had worn a uniform decades ago and had never once lost the habit. A former Navy captain. He picked up his glass and raised it directly toward me, his hand absolutely steady, his eyes locked on mine with the kind of respect that cannot be manufactured or bought. Fair winds and following seas. He said, his voice cutting through the silence like a signal flare over open water. Respect to you, Lieutenant. Like falling dominoes, they rose, one by one, then in twos and threes, then entire tables at once, all 50 VIPs stood from their seats. They turned away from my mother. They raised their glasses to me in the chandelier light. No one spoke. No one toasted. No one applauded. The silence was more devastating than any standing ovation could have been, because it wasn't celebration, it was judgment. It was a verdict rendered by 50 people who had just watched a mother publicly destroy herself. My mother stood in the center of it all, completely alone. Her champagne flute dangling forgotten from her white-knuckled fingers, surrounded by the smoldering ruins of the empire she had spent 14 years building on lies and had just watched collapse in under 3 minutes. The party dissolved into wreckage. VIPs grabbed their coats off the backs of chairs and moved toward the exits in tight, whispering clusters. Shoulders turned away from my mother, refusing to make eye contact. She was a social leper, now radioactive. 14 years of carefully constructed lies, 14 years of fake smiles and curated guest lists, and borrowed prestige, shattered in under 3 minutes by a man who actually knew the truth. Jennifer broke free from the head table and ran straight at me. She collided with me hard, wrapping both arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. Her whole body shook with deep, racking sobs. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking apart. "I'm so sorry, Sienna, for everything, for all of it, for every single year." I put my hand on her back, a firm, steady pat, the way you'd reassure a soldier after a rough patrol. "Mission accomplished," I told her quietly. She was safe now. Thomas would protect her. The Admiral's family would protect her. The 14-year watch was officially over. The promise I had made to a dying man in a hospital bed was fulfilled. I grabbed my coat from the back of my chair and walked toward the heavy glass front doors. Outside, a violent thunderstorm had rolled into Arlington. Freezing rain lashed against the pavement and turned the valet stand into a waterfall. I pushed through the doors and stepped into the downpour without hesitating. The cold hit me instantly, soaking through the thin black dress in seconds, but I kept walking. Steady pace. Eyes forward, shoulders square. Behind me, I heard frantic, slipping footsteps on the wet stone. The sharp click of heels skidding on marble, then hitting concrete. I didn't turn around. I already knew who it was. "Wait! Sienna! Wait!" My mother's voice cut through the rain. shrill and panicked and stripped of every ounce of composure she had ever manufactured. I heard her stumble. I heard her catch herself. She grabbed my sleeve and yanked hard enough to pull me off balance. I turned slowly. She was destroyed. Her hair was plastered to her face in dark, wet ropes. Her mascara ran in black rivers down both cheeks. The expensive designer dress clung to her frame, soaked through, and without the armor of the ballroom, the warm lighting, the champagne, the compliant audience, she looked small, fragile, pathetic. "You have to talk to the Admiral." She was practically screaming over the thunder. "You have to fix this. My friends, they're going to ruin me. My reputation, everything I built. You owe me, Sienna. You owe this family." I stopped walking. I didn't pull my arm away. I looked down at her manicured hand gripping the wet fabric of my coat, the nails still perfect, still painted, still sharp. Then I looked at her face, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not sadness. Just a flat, clean emptiness like a field after a controlled burn. "You don't care about me," I said. My voice cut easily through the thunder, the same voice I used to issue orders in a combat zone. "You never did. You only care that your mask slipped." She started crying hysterically. The sobs were loud, theatrical, perfectly timed, the same performance she had been running since the day my father died. "But your father told you to take care of this family. You made a promise. You swore on his deathbed. You can't abandon me." The contract expired tonight. My voice dropped to a lethal commanding register that could halt a platoon mid-stride. "I stayed to protect my sister. Now she has a real family. And you..." I looked at the rain running down her ruined face. "You traded your dignity for a cheap laugh in front of 50 strangers." I ripped my arm free from her grip. The force of it sent her stumbling backward on the wet concrete, her heels sliding out from under her. "Lose my number." I turned my back on her and walked into the dark storm. The freezing rain hammered my shoulders. My footsteps were steady, even unhurried, the cadence of a soldier who has completed the mission and is heading home. Behind me, she collapsed onto the wet concrete, sobbing into the downpour, completely alone, stripped of every lie she had ever built. I did not look back. The salt breeze off the Norfolk Naval Base whipped against my pristine dress whites as the morning sun hit the Atlantic and turned it into a sheet of blinding silver. The promotion orders echoed from the base loudspeaker, reading my full service record to 600 sailors standing in formation on the parade deck. My medals were heavy on my chest: the Bronze Star with Valor, the Purple Heart, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, 3 campaign ribbons, and the EOD Master Warfare Pin that had cost me more blood and bone than any piece of metal should ever cost a human being. I stood at attention and breathed in the clean, salt-tinged air. There was no anxiety in my chest, no dread of a phone call, no invisible weight, just the quiet, steady rhythm of a life I had built with my own 2 scarred hands. Had the ghosts finally been silenced? The Admiral stepped up to the podium, his weathered face breaking into a genuine, proud smile. He read the promotion citation aloud, his voice carrying across the parade ground, and then he crossed the stage with 3 firm strides and personally pinned the gold oak leaf of a Lieutenant Commander 04 to my collar. His hands were steady. His eyes were wet. In the front row, Jennifer and Thomas sat side by side, clapping until their palms were raw and red. My sister looked radiant, healthy, strong, free. The suffocating shadow of our childhood had finally lifted off her shoulders completely. And I could see it in the way she held herself upright, confident, no longer flinching at loud voices or sudden movements. We locked eyes across the parade deck, and something passed between us that words would only cheapen. We had both survived the war, not the one overseas, the one at the dinner table. The military formation dismissed. The crowd broke into groups, shaking hands, taking photographs against the gray hulls of warships berthed in the background. I turned to walk toward Jennifer and Thomas. Out of habit, pure, hardwired muscle memory from 14 years of threat assessment, my eyes swept the perimeter of the base. The fence line, the guard posts, the access road. And I saw her, way in the back, entirely outside the barbed wire security fence, standing in the dirt shoulder of the access road, 50 yards from the nearest armed guard post. A woman in a cheap rumpled coat, not the designer labels she used to wear, not the silk, not the cashmere. Something from a clearance rack at a department store that was probably going out of business. She hadn't been invited. She couldn't get past the armed sentries at the main gate. She just stood there in the dust, pressing her palms flat against the chain link fence, her fingers curling through the metal diamonds, watching hundreds of United States sailors salute the daughter she had called a worthless failure who would die a nameless grunt in a ditch. She was crying. Even from 50 yards away, I could see it, the way her shoulders hitched, the way her head dropped forward, the way her hands gripped the fence like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She looked small, insignificant, a minor figure at the edge of a frame that no longer included her. Part of me knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to walk over. She wanted me to open the gate. She wanted forgiveness. Not real forgiveness, not the kind that requires accountability and change, but the easy, convenient kind that would let her rewrite the story. She wanted to stand beside me in the photographs and tell her remaining friends that she had always believed in me, always supported me, always been proud. I didn't move. Not a single inch. I looked at her for 2 seconds. I acknowledged that she existed, that she was breathing, that she was standing on the other side of a fence she could never cross again, not because of the barbed wire, not because of the armed guards, but because of every choice she had made for 14 merciless years. Then I turned completely around. I walked toward Jennifer, toward Thomas, toward the Admiral, toward my brothers and sisters in arms. The people who had bled with me, fought beside me, held me up when I couldn't stand, and never once demanded that I become smaller, so they could feel bigger about themselves. I left her outside the gates. Forever. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting toxic people back into your life. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away and build your own empire. If you believe in protecting your peace, please like this video. Subscribe and tell me in the comments, how did you finally walk away from the people who hurt you?